So picture a Roman senator standing right in the middle of the forum in the 1st century CE.
Okay, setting the scene. I like it.
Right. And he is just absolutely beside himself with rage. His name is Seneca the Younger.
Oh, yeah, the Stoic philosopher.
Exactly. And he's standing there watching the wealthiest women in Rome walking past him in these garments that are so sheer, so translucent, that he basically considers them a complete moral abomination.
He was definitely not a fan of the new fashion trends.
No, not at all. He actually writes down this furious complaint, literally screaming that the Roman Empire is bankrupting itself, that they are draining their gold reserves so that, and this is a direct quote, the adulteress may be visible through her thin dress.
Wow, he really didn't hold back.
He didn't.
Mm.
He is terrified that Rome's morality and economy are just collapsing simultaneously. And the culprit, it's this strange, shimmering new fabric that has suddenly appeared in the capital.
And the craziest part is the Romans don't even know what it actually is, right?
Exactly. They have no clue. Their greatest poets, like Virgil, genuinely believe this fabric is just, combed from the leaves of some mystical trees somewhere in the Far East.
Which is just a wild misunderstanding of biology.
Right. They have absolutely no idea that this material, which is single-handedly draining their imperial treasury, by the way, is actually the spun saliva of a blind, flightless moth.
The Bombyx mori?
Yes, the Bombyx mori, cultivated thousands of miles away in China.
It really is the ultimate example of a commodity completely outpacing the knowledge of its origin. I mean, the physical goods were traveling at a speed and volume that intellectual understanding just couldn't keep up with.
Yeah, the stuff got there, but the instructions didn't.
Exactly. We often think of globalization as this, 20th century phenomenon, like it's just a byproduct of container ships and fiber optic cables.
Right, modern tech.
But Seneca's outrage in the Roman Forum is just concrete proof that a complex, pulsating web of global commerce was already dictating the fortunes of empires 2,000 years ago.
And if you are listening to this deep dive from Paulis Zauberwald Studios today, surrounded by modern tech, it's so incredibly easy to assume our hyper-connected reality is completely unprecedented.
Oh, for sure. We look at our supply chains, our global pandemics, our shifting superpowers, and we just think we're the first ones to deal with a world this intertwined.
We really do. But going through the mountain of historical documents, the archaeological reports, and translated text for this deep dive, that assumption just gets totally annihilated.
It really does.
We're looking at a network that spanned over 6,400 kilometers, and it actively shaped human destiny for more than 1,500 years. We're talking about the Silk Road.
The greatest network in human history.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because looking at the sources, the very first thing we have to do is completely shatter the image most of us have in our heads.
Yeah, the popular image is pretty flawed.
Right, because when I picture the Silk Road, I just imagine a neat, single, well-paved highway cutting through the sand dunes, like with a line of camels walking single file from Beijing straight to Rome.
Right, like an ancient interstate highway. But that image is entirely a Victorian fabrication. The road itself is a total myth.
Wait, really? A complete myth?
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody who actually lived on it, fought over it, or died on it ever called it the Silk Road.
So where did the name come from?
The term Seidenstrasse, which is German for Silk Road, wasn't even coined until 1877.
Wow. That late.
Yeah, by a geographer named Ferdinand von Richthofen. And to call it a single road is just a profound misunderstanding of the geography.
Because it wasn't just one path.
Not at all. It was a chaotic, decentralized, constantly shifting web of overland trails, mountain passes, and maritime routes.
It's like calling the entire global internet a single copper wire.
That is a perfect analogy. It was a network of overlapping circuits. You had northern routes that had to carefully skirt the edges of the Taklamakan Desert.
And sources say the name of that desert literally translates to go in and you won't come out.
Exactly. It was a death trap. Then you had southern routes pushing through the freezing altitudes of the Pamir Mountains, so it was less of a highway and more of a braided river of trade.
It's constantly finding the path of least resistance.
Right. Flowing around, collapsing empires, shifting sand dunes, and bandit territories.
So if there was no central authority, paving a road and putting up signposts, who actually forged these paths in the first place?
That's the big question.
Because the distances we are talking about are absolutely lethal. You don't just wander into the Taklamakan Desert and accidentally end up in Persia. Someone had to map this out.
And what's fascinating here is that it wasn't the Romans and it wasn't the Chinese.
Wait, it wasn't the big empires?
No, the groundwork was laid thousands of years before the grand empires even realized what was happening. It was entirely driven by nomadic mobility.
Okay, so who are we talking about?
If we look at the archaeological record, we see the Scythians.
The horse-riding tribes?
Exactly. These incredibly fierce, mobile horse-riding tribes active across the central Eurasian steppes. Their range was just staggering. It stretched from the Carpathian Mountains in Eastern Europe all the way to the Gansu corridor in China.
Wait, so the people who essentially drew the map for global trade were nomads who didn't even build cities?
Precisely because they didn't build cities. Their entire civilization was built on movement. They understood the microclimates, they knew where the water was, and crucially, they mastered horse breeding.
So they were already making these massive treks.
Right. They created an overland steppe route long before silk was even a factor. Some scholars even argue that if we go back to 5000 BCE, we should really be calling it the Jade Road.
Because jade was the main commodity back then.
Yeah, jade from the Kunlun Mountains was moving into China along these exact nomadic trails. The Scythians and other steppe tribes trailblazed the harsh terrain.
And we know this because of their art, right?
Yes, we can track their movements through their distinct animal-style art.
Those little bronze plaques.
Exactly, these beautiful, intricate, rectangular bronze belt plaques depicting predators and prey locked in combat. Archaeologists find them everywhere from the Black Sea to Inner Mongolia.
That is wild.
They were the original architects of the network. They exacted tolls and provided guides for the few early, brave, long-distance merchants.
That completely flips the script. But there still had to be a moment where this localized, nomadic trading network got plugged into the massive economic engines of the sedentary empires.
Right, the moment of connection.
And based on the Han Dynasty records we're looking at, the catalyst for that wasn't like a bunch of merchants looking for new markets. It was sheer military desperation.
It's one of the greatest stories of accidental discovery in human history.
Okay, so set the stage for us.
We are in 138 BCE. The Han Dynasty, ruled by Emperor Wu, is facing an existential threat on its northern border from a confederation of nomadic warriors called the Xiongnu.
Now, these guys are terrifying, right?
Devastatingly effective. Their cavalry is mobile, their composite bows have incredible range, and they are conducting these brutal, lightning-fast raids deep into Chinese agricultural settlements.
The Emperor Wu is just getting crushed.
He's losing the war, yeah. His infantry and heavy chariots just cannot keep up with the Xiongnu cavalry.
So he needs allies who fight like the Xiongnu to help him crush the Xiongnu.
Exactly. And he hears a rumor about another nomadic group, the Yuezhi. They had previously been defeated by the Xiongnu and driven far to the west.
So Emperor Wu calculates that the Yuezhi probably want revenge.
Right. So he commissions a diplomatic envoy, a palace attendant named Zhang Qian, to journey into the completely unknown, unmapped western regions.
Which is essentially walking off the edge of the Chinese map.
Totally. He sends him out to find the Yuezhi and negotiate a military alliance.
Which sounds like a suicide mission. And from what I read, it goes spectacularly wrong almost immediately.
Oh, it's a disaster.
He sets out with about 100 men, and the very first thing that happens is he gets captured by the exact people he's trying to destroy.
The Xiongnu intercepts his caravan.
But they don't just execute him, which is what you might expect. They hold him hostage for a decade. A full 10 years.
But this is where the nuance of historical captivity is so fascinating.
How so?
Well, the Xiongnu didn't just lock him in a dungeon. I mean, they didn't really have dungeons. They're nomads.
Oh, right. So he's just traveling with them.
Yeah, he was kept as a high-status captive within their moving camps. He was even given a Xiongnu wife with whom he had children. He lived their life.
That is insane.
But Zhang Qian never forgot his mission. He spent those 10 years quietly observing his captors, learning their language, mapping their territories in his head, and understanding the geopolitics of the steppe.
Just playing the long game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when the Xiongnu leadership grew complacent, he took his chance, grabbed his core team, and escaped.
But he doesn't escape back to China. That's the part that really blew my mind. He's been a prisoner for a decade, he finally gets free, and instead of running home to the emperor, he pushes further west into the terrifying unknown to finish the mission.
His dedication is just astounding. He navigates through the treacherous mountain passes and finally, miraculously, locates the Yuezhi in the region of Bactria.
Which is roughly modern-day Afghanistan,
Yeah.
right?
Yep, exactly.
And what's their reaction? Does he get the army he promised the emperor?
They're even close.
Oh, no.
The Yuezhi have settled into this beautiful, fertile river valley. They are prosperous, they are comfortable, and they look at this exhausted Chinese diplomat and essentially say, we have absolutely no interest in marching thousands of miles back east to fight a suicidal war against the Yongnu.
We like it here.
We're good, thanks. So militarily, his mission is a complete failure.
So wait, he spends 13 years away from home, 10 of them as a hostage, and he fails his primary objective. So militarily, his mission was a complete failure, right?
Well, I would actually push back on that a bit. He failed to get the alliance, sure, but he succeeded as the ultimate geographic discoverer.
Because of what he brought back.
Exactly. When Zhang Qian finally makes it back to the Han court in 126 BCE, with only one of his original 100 men surviving, by the way.
Oh my God, only one.
Yeah, it was brutal. But he brings back intelligence that shatters the Han dynasty's entire worldview.
Because up until this point, the Chinese believed they were the sole civilized center of the world,
Right.
surrounded only by nomadic barbarians.
Right. But Zhang Qian reports that out in the west, past the deserts and the mountains, there are massive, wealthy, urbanized civilizations.
He found the other empires.
He describes Dayuan in the Fergana Valley, Daxia and Bactria, and the edges of the Parthian Empire.
And he tells Emperor Wu that these are agrarian societies living in walled cities, trading vast amounts of goods.
And, crucially, that they have a deep, untapped hunger for Chinese products.
But the thing that really catches Emperor Wu's attention isn't the trade potential, is it? It's the horses.
Always the horses.
Zhang Qian brings back reports of these mythical creatures he saw in the Fergana Valley, the heavenly horses.
Yes. Because the Han military was desperately constrained by the quality of their local steppe ponies.
They were just too small, right?
Small, slow, and easily outmaneuvered by the Xiannu. But Zhang Qian describes these Fergana horses as towering, muscular beasts.
And they were rumored to sweat blood. Okay, I have to pause here. Sweating blood. Is that just some mythological embellishment to impress the emperor, or was there an actual biological reality to that?
It was likely a biological reality.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Modern parasitologists believe these horses were infected with a nematode parasite.
Gross.
Very. It's called Paraphilaria multipapilosa. It burrows under the skin of horses in that specific region and causes small, bleeding skin nodules.
Oh, wow. So when the horses run.
When they were ridden hard and started to sweat, the sweat would mix with the blood from these nodules, making it look like they were literally sweating blood.
That is both fascinating and absolutely horrifying.
But to the Han, this wasn't a parasite. It was a sign of divine power, a literal dragon horse.
So Emperor Wu realizes these horses are the super weapon he needs to finally defeat the Xiannu. What does he do? Does he just, offer to buy them?
He tries diplomacy first. He sends envoys with a massive horse made of solid gold to trade for the heavenly horses.
That is quite the offer.
But the king of Dayuan is insulted, kills the envoys, and keeps the gold.
Oh, well, that's a mistake.
A massive geopolitical escalation. Emperor Wu launches the War of the Heavenly Horses. He sends a massive army across the brutal terrain of the Tarim Basin, which is just a logistical nightmare, purely to conquer the city and secure the breeding stock.
And the unintended consequence of this war is what creates the physical infrastructure of the Silk Road.
Exactly.
Because to keep his army supplied over thousands of miles of hostile territory, Emperor Wu has to fortify the route.
Precisely. By 114 BCE, the Han armies had pushed westward, securing the Gansu corridor. And this fundamentally changes how we view the Great Wall of China.
Right. We always imagine the Great Wall as this static defensive shield designed purely to keep people out.
But in this region, Emperor Wu extends the Great Wall westward, like a giant fortified spear.
He establishes military garrisons, watchtowers, and agricultural colonies deep into the desert.
He isn't just blocking nomads. He is building a highly militarized, protected corridor.
He essentially creates a secure funnel that plugs the massive economic engine of China directly into the pre-existing nomadic networks of Central Asia.
And that changes everything. The military expansion inadvertently created a secure funnel for global commerce.
So the infrastructure was built for war, but the merchants immediately realized they could use it for profit.
Naturally.
Because if you have fortified watchtowers every few miles protecting military supply chains, well, that's the safest route for a caravan carrying silk. That clears the first mile out of China.
But only the first mile.
Right. Once the goods leave the protection of the Great Wall, how are they actually moving? Because we already established that a single merchant walking from Shannon all the way to Rome is a myth.
Right. To understand the mechanics of the Silk Road, you have to picture the ultimate relay race.
A relay race.
Yeah. The sheer physics and economics of the terrain meant that almost no single individual or caravan made the end-to-end journey. The logistical friction was simply too high.
Because you're dealing with such extreme environments.
Exactly. You have to navigate the lethal heat of the deserts, find water at very specific oasis towns, and then immediately transition to surviving the freezing, oxygen-starved altitudes of the Pamir Mountains.
You couldn't just use one type of pack animal for all of that.
No way. A camel that survives the Taklamakan Desert will freeze or slip to its death in the mountains. You had to unload the cargo and switch to yaks or specialized mountain ponies.
It sounds identical to a modern global supply chain.
It really is.
Like, if I order a piece of electronics from a factory overseas today, it goes from a local truck to a shipping container onto a massive cargo ship across the ocean to a port.
Then unloaded onto a freight train.
Sent to a regional distribution center, and finally put on a delivery van. And every single time that cargo changes hands or changes transport modes, someone is taking a percentage, paying a tariff, or charging a storage fee.
Exactly. The exact same mechanism applied on the Silk Road, just with beasts of burden instead of diesel engines.
So who are the people running the distribution centers in the middle of this relay?
If you want to identify the true masters of the Silk Road, the people who controlled the flow of goods during the network's absolute peak between the 4th and 8th centuries, you have to look at the Sogdians.
The Sogdians. Who were they?
They were an Iranian people whose homeland was Transoxiana, which is centered around modern-day Uzbekistan, particularly the city of Samarkand.
Okay, so how did one specific group manage to dominate a network that spanned so many different empires? Did they have a massive army?
No, not at all. They dominated through commercial adaptability and diaspora networking.
Oh, so they just set up shops everywhere.
Exactly. They realized that controlling the route didn't require military conquest. It required controlling the nodes.
The middle points.
Right. The Sogdians established a chain of diaspora communities stretching from their homeland all the way deep into the Chinese capitals.
They didn't just pass through.
No, they moved in, set up shop, learned the local languages, and often married locally, integrating into mixed families.
So if I'm a merchant from India and I arrive at an oasis town in Central Asia, I don't need to speak Chinese to do business because I'm just selling to a Sogdian middleman who lives there.
Exactly. And because of this, the Sogdian language became the absolute lingua franca of the Silk Road.
Like English in modern global business.
Exactly like that. It was the language of contracts, of bills of sale, of negotiation. And we actually have incredible archaeological proof of this.
Really? Like what?
Well, in 1907, the British explorer Aurel Stein discovered a mailbag that had been lost in the desert near Dunhuang for over 1,500 years.
A 1,500-year-old mailbag. That is amazing.
It's incredible. Inside were the Sogdian ancient letters. And they aren't grand diplomatic treaties or anything. They are the everyday complaints of merchants.
Like ancient customer service emails.
Basically, one letter is from a Sogdian woman named Mune. She was essentially abandoned by her merchant husband in a Chinese garrison town.
Oh, wow. That's for F.
She writes back to her homeland, absolutely furious, begging for money to pay her debts. She even complains that she'd rather be married to a dog or a pig than to him.
Oh my God, she went off.
She really did. But it's this intensely human glimpse into the incredibly complex, far-flung social networks that were required to make this relay system function.
And as those goods move through the Sogdian network, they eventually hit the Parthians, right?
Yes, the Parthian Empire controlled the territory covering modern-day Iran and Mesopotamia.
So they are the gatekeepers to the west.
Exactly. They were the crucial final bridge between the Central Asian networks and the Mediterranean world. And they were notoriously, fiercely protective of their position as middlemen.
Meaning they didn't want anyone bypassing them?
Right. They actively prevented direct contact between the Romans and the Chinese, because keeping both empires in the dark allowed the Parthians to mark up the prices astronomically.
Which brings us right back to Seneca in the Roman Forum, screaming about the price of silk.
Full circle.
The Parthians are hiking the price, but Rome is paying it anyway. And this is where the Chinese monopoly comes into play. Because if you want silk, you can't just plant a seed.
No, the production of silk sericulture is an incredibly complex biological process. And the Han Dynasty guarded it like nuclear codes.
let's talk about the mechanics of sericulture. It's not just, catching wild moths.
Far from it. You have to cultivate thousands of specific mulberry trees because the Bombyx mori silkworm will only eat fresh mulberry leaves.
Fussy eaters.
Very. They eat constantly, growing massive over a few weeks before spinning a cocoon made of a single continuous thread of raw silk that can be up to 1 kilometer long.
A single thread 1 kilometer long. That is wild.
But here's the crucial part. If you let the moth mature and hatch, it secretes an enzyme that burns a hole through the cocoon.
Ruining the thread.
Exactly. It cuts that single long thread into thousands of useless short pieces.
So to get the silk, you have to boil the cocoons alive before the moth hatches.
Yes. It requires precise timing, immense labor, and perfect temperature control to unravel that single thread.
And the Chinese had perfected this over thousands of years.
And they placed a strict imperial ban on the export of silkworm eggs or mulberry cuttings. Anyone caught trying to smuggle the biological components out of the empire faced execution.
That perfectly explains the Roman ignorance. They are interacting with the finished textile at the end of a 4,000-mile supply chain, but the biological technology required to make it is locked behind a wall of imperial secrecy and executed smugglers.
So Virgil writing that it's come from leaves isn't just poetic license, it's a reflection of a total intelligence blackout.
And that intelligence blackout is what allowed the middlemen to drain the Roman economy.
Pliny the Elder actually calculates the trade deficit. He claims that India, China, and the Arabian Peninsula were draining the Roman Empire of 100 million sesterces every single year.
So the demand for the exotic completely overrode the economic logic of the state.
Exactly.
And while all this gold is flowing east and silk is flowing west across the deserts, the sources make it very clear that we cannot ignore the alternative networks.
Right, it wasn't all just sand and camels.
If the desert routes were the main highway, there were other, equally vital and arguably more brutal paths. I really want to talk about the southwestern route.
Ah, the Tea-Horse Road.
Yes, famously known as the Tea-Horse Road. Because looking at the geography of this, it seems practically unnavigable.
It is perhaps the most extreme example of how local biological necessities can force a trade route into existence across the most hostile terrain imaginable.
Where exactly did this run?
It connected the lush, low-altitude tea-growing regions of Sichuan and Yunnan in southwestern China with the freezing, high-altitude plateaus of Tibet and northern India.
And just looking at the elevation maps, to make this journey, porters and pack animals had to cross 78 different mountains that were over 3,000 meters high.
And it wasn't just mountains. They had to navigate deep, sheer river canyons, crossing them on unstable iron chain bridges swaying in the wind.
The physical mechanics of carrying goods up those mountains are terrifying.
Yeah.
The sources talk about human porters carrying loads of compressed tea bricks that weighed up to 200 pounds.
On their backs.
Yes. And they couldn't even put the load down on the ground to rest, because they'd never be able to lift it back up at that altitude.
So how did they rest?
They carried these special wooden walking sticks with metal cleats. They would pause, rest the weight of the tea on the stick, catch their breath in the thin air, and just keep going.
That is grueling.
Why undergo that kind of torture? What was the economic driver that made that worthwhile?
It was a perfect, uncompromising, symbiotic relationship driven by geography.
Okay, unpack that.
Well, the Tibetans, living at massive altitudes, had a diet heavily dependent on meat and dairy. Yak, butter, barley, that sort of thing.
Heavy stuff.
Right. They desperately needed the vitamins, particularly vitamin C, and the digestive aid provided by Chinese tea. The tea wasn't a luxury for them. It was a biological necessity for survival at altitude.
And what did the Tibetans have that the Chinese dynasties desperately needed? War horses.
Exactly. Specifically, sturdy, high-altitude Tibetan ponies that were much more resilient than the horses bred on the Chinese plains.
So the Chinese traded tea for the military power they needed to secure their northern borders.
And what's absolutely incredible about this specific route is its historical durability.
What do you mean?
Well, the Silk Road across the desert waxed and waned with empires, but the Tea-Horse Road became a permanent geographic groove.
It just never stopped.
Right. And it suddenly jumped back into global relevance thousands of years later during World War II.
Oh, this is the part of the sources that blew my mind. It's a stunning pivot in military logistics.
Yes, setting the stage, by 1942, the Japanese military had completely occupied the coastal ports of China and captured Burma,
They basically blockaded the country.
effectively severing inland China from the modern international supply lines that were bringing in weapons, fuel, and medical supplies from the Allies. The modern infrastructure was completely neutralized.
So, cut off from the ocean and the modern roads, the Chinese and Allied forces literally have to look thousands of years backward.
They reactivate the ancient T-horse road.
I was reading the accounts of Peter Gallior, who lived in the region during the war. He describes how this ancient primitive path suddenly became the central artery of a modern war effort.
Just an incredible image.
The modern supply chain was replaced by over 25,000 horses and mules, mobilizing to carry modern ammunition and supplies from India over the Himalayas into inland China.
Goulard's observations are profound because they really highlight the fragility of modern systems compared to ancient geographic realities.
Like, you can bomb a seaport into rubble.
You can destroy a railway line, you can sink a cargo ship, but you cannot bomb a mountain pass out of existence. When 20th century technology was systematically blocked, the humble mule and the ancient trails proved to be the only indestructible link between nations.
Which perfectly transitions us to the other massive alternative route that you can't bomb: the ocean.
The Maritime Silk Road.
Because the deep dive sources are very explicit that the Silk Road wasn't just a land phenomenon. There was this massive maritime network, and it was operating long before European galleons ever entered the picture.
Absolutely. The maritime networks were pioneered by Austronesian sailors in Southeast Asia.
And these guys were master navigators, right?
Unbelievable navigators. They were sailing incredible long-distance, ocean-going ships well before the Roman Empire even existed.
That is just wild to think about.
And the mechanics of their shipbuilding were uniquely suited to this trade. They didn't build rigid ships held together with iron nails, which would just shatter on coral reefs.
So how'd they build them?
They built ships using sewn planks and lashed lugs, literally sewing the wooden hull together with coconut fiber ropes.
Sewing a ship together.
It sounds crazy, but it made the ships flexible enough to survive the brutal waves and reefs of the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea.
And the economic scale of the maritime route changes the math entirely, doesn't it? Because no matter how many camels you string together in a caravan, a single ocean-going vessel can carry exponentially more cargo.
The volume difference is staggering. A large merchant ship could carry hundreds of tons of ceramics, spices, and textiles in a single voyage.
That's the equivalent of thousands of camels.
Exactly. And critically, the maritime route offered a bypass to the geopolitics of the land.
Oh, right. Like if a war breaks out.
If a massive war broke out in Central Asia, closing the overland routes and driving up the Parthian tariffs, the maritime networks simply absorbed the demand.
Traders faced typhoons and pirates, sure, but they could generally sail entirely around the political instability of land-based empires.
The land and sea routes operated together like a massive continental lung. If one airway got blocked, the other expanded to take in the air.
Okay, so we've mapped out the hardware of the network, the relay stations, the mountains, the sewn plank ships, the raw goods like silk and tea.
Right, the physical stuff.
But when you have thousands of merchants, diplomats, refugees, and soldiers constantly moving across a continent, they aren't just carrying physical cargo.
They are carrying ideas.
They are carrying technologies. They are carrying gods. This brings us to the software of the Silk Road. The sources describe these routes not just as commercial arteries, but as the first great spiritual highways in human history.
The movement of religion and the movement of commerce were inextricably linked.
It was not a coincidence that the first large-scale missionary movements occurred along these exact paths.
The relationship was built on a foundation of deep, pragmatic, mutual dependence. The monks needed the merchants, and the merchants needed the monks.
Let's look at the mechanics of how that actually worked on the ground. Like, if I am a merchant crossing the Taclocan Desert, I'm constantly terrified of being robbed by bandits, running out of water, or dying of exposure.
You need a secure place to rest.
Exactly. And the sources detail how Buddhist monasteries perfectly filled this void. Merchants would actively donate massive amounts of their profits to fund the construction of monasteries in the remote oasis towns.
They were engaging in the Buddhist concept of merit-making.
Donating wealth to secure good karma for safe passage.
Right. But the practical earthly result of these donations was the creation of heavily fortified, well-resourced compounds in the middle of nowhere.
So they were building out the infrastructure.
Exactly. In return for the funding, these monasteries essentially function as the primary infrastructure of the Silk Road. They provided travelers with lodging, medical care, secure storage for their valuable goods, and even functioned as rudimentary banks,
where merchants could deposit wealth or secure loans. I love thinking about these monasteries as the premium airport lounges, or secure co-working spaces of the ancient world.
That's a great way to look at it.
Imagine the scene inside one of these compounds in an oasis town like Dunhuang. You have merchants from India, Persia, and China, all exhausted, all taking shelter from a sandstorm in the exact same complex,
They are eating together, sharing market intelligence.
warning each other about bandit movements. And inevitably, they start talking about their beliefs. It is the absolute perfect incubator for cultural cross-pollination.
And we can track exactly how that incubation transformed the religions themselves.
Right, because religions didn't stay static.
Not at all. Take Buddhism. It originated in the Indian subcontinent. But as it traveled north and west along the trade routes, it passed through the Kushan Empire in Central Asia.
And the Kushan Empire was a fascinating melting pot, right?
Unbelievably diverse. It had inherited the Hellenistic Greek cultural leftovers from Alexander the Great's conquests centuries earlier, mixed with Persian traditions.
So you have Greek, Persian, and Indian cultures all crashing together.
Exactly. And it is in this specific, highly diverse Central Asian environment that the complex theology of Mahayana Buddhism, the Great Vehicle, likely developed its mature form.
That's the branch that focuses on a pantheon of enlightened beings, or bodhisattvas, helping others achieve salvation.
Yes, before being transmitted further east into China, the religion literally adapted to the multicultural reality of the trade routes.
Which brings us to a concept in the research that I find incredibly compelling: syncretism.
The blending of completely different religious beliefs into something new.
The Silk Road forced cultures to merge their spiritual vocabularies. There's a specific artifact detailed in the sources that illustrates this perfectly.
The Nestorian stele.
Yes, a massive stone stele erected in the Tang dynasty capital of Chang'an in 781 CE.
It's a remarkable document. It was erected by the Church of the East, a Christian sect that had traveled from Syria and Persia all the way to the Chinese capital.
And it documents the history of Christianity in China, but it doesn't use standard Christian terminology. Because how do you explain the concept of Jesus to a population steeped in Buddhism and Taoism?
You use their word?
Exactly. The text on the stele translates Christian scriptures as sutras. It describes Christian saints as Buddhas. It frames the Christian God using Taoist concepts of the eternal void.
And we see an even more extreme version of this with Manichaeism.
Oh, Manichaeism. This one is fascinating.
Founded in the 3rd century by the prophet Mani in Persia, Manichaeism was perhaps the ultimate purpose-built Silk Road religion.
What do you mean purpose-built?
Mani consciously and deliberately synthesized elements of Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism into a single universalist doctrine.
He just took the greatest hits of all three.
He essentially created an open-source religion designed specifically to appeal to the highly mobile, multilingual, multicultural merchant communities.
And it worked, didn't it?
It was so successful at bridging these cultural gaps that at one point in the 8th century, it actually became the official state religion of the Uyghur Cognate on the steppes.
Now, I have to ask about the mechanics of this blending. When the Nestorian Christians call their saints Buddhas, is that just a clever marketing ploy?
How do you mean?
Like, are the missionaries sitting around saying, okay, these locals don't know what an angel is, let's just call it a bodhisattva so we can get them in the door? Or is it a genuine fundamental blending of the belief systems themselves?
Well, it undoubtedly started as a translation necessity. You have to use the vocabulary available to you.
Right, just practical communication.
But over time, as generations lived in these blended communities, the synthesis became profound and organic. We see the clearest evidence of this not in the texts, but in the visual arts.
Let's look at the transmission of Greco-Buddhist art. This is where Alexander the Great's legacy collides with Buddhism.
Exactly. When Buddhism encountered the Hellenistic culture in regions like Gantara, the artistic representation of the religion fundamentally changed.
Because before this, the Buddha wasn't really depicted as a person, right?
Right. He was rarely depicted in human form. He was represented by symbols like a footprint or an empty throne.
But then the Greeks get involved.
Under Greek influence, we suddenly see statues of the Buddha looking like a Greek god wearing a classical flowing toga.
That visual shift alone is wild.
But the blending goes even deeper into specific iconography. Consider the Greek god of the north wind, Boreas.
Okay, Boreas.
He is classically depicted as a bearded man holding a billowing bag of wind above his head.
And as that image travels east along the Silk Road, it sort of hitchhikes onto different cultures.
Yes. The image of Boreas travels into Central Asia and influences the depiction of the Zoroastrian wind god, Wardo.
And it doesn't stop there.
No, it keeps moving east along the trade routes into China, merging with Buddhist iconography.
And eventually it hits Japan.
By the time the specific visual motif reaches Japan centuries later, the Greek god Boreas has fully evolved into the Japanese Shinto god of wind, Fujin.
And Fujin is still depicted as a fearsome figure holding that exact same billowing bag of wind over his shoulders.
That visual lineage, stretching from Athens to Kyoto, proves that cultures weren't just slapping new labels on foreign concepts, they were deeply internalizing and evolving them.
That visual evolution from Boreas to Fujin is just incredible. But it wasn't just statues and sutras making the journey. It was world-altering technology.
The flow of innovation was a massive two-way street.
Moving from west to east, you had the advanced glass-making techniques of the Roman and Egyptian worlds.
And later, the highly sophisticated mathematics and astronomy of the Islamic Golden Age in India.
And moving from east to west, you had Chinese innovations that would literally lay the foundation for the modern world. We are talking about the magnetic compass, gunpowder, and crucially, papermaking.
The transmission of papermaking completely rewired the global economy and the intellectual landscape of humanity.
Because paper was invented in China during the Han Dynasty, but the technology was a closely guarded secret for centuries, right?
It didn't reach the Islamic world until the 8th century. Legend says it was transmitted by captured Chinese papermakers after the Battle of Talas in 751 CE.
And from the Islamic world, it eventually made its slow journey into Europe.
And the economic implications of paper are staggering.
Because if we go back to the sheer physical danger of the Silk Road, the bandits, the mountains, the thousands of miles, how do you actually conduct massive commercial transactions?
It's a huge logistical problem.
Right. If I am buying a massive caravan of silk, I can't physically carry hundreds of pounds of gold or silver coins across the desert. It is too heavy, and it's a massive target for every bandit from Samarkand to Chang'an.
The logistics of hard currency became the primary bottleneck to global trade. The Silk Road necessitated financial innovation.
You needed a way to transfer wealth without transferring physical mass.
And that's exactly where paper comes in.
The sources detail how the Chinese developed feiqian, or flying cash, during the Tang Dynasty.
Which was basically a paper certificate of deposit.
Right, a merchant could deposit his heavy metal coins with a trusted regional agency, receive a lightweight paper certificate in return, travel hundreds of miles without the risk of being robbed of his gold, and then redeem that paper for coins at another agency.
And as this concept moved west, it evolved. In the Islamic world and later in Europe, the necessity of long-distance trade birthed things like the Hawala system and bills of exchange.
Deposit banking essentially emerged because carrying heavy metal across Eurasia was mathematically and physically impossible at scale.
The very concept of abstract representational wealth, the idea that a piece of paper has value because a network of humans agrees it does, was violently accelerated by the logistical nightmare of the trade routes.
But the requirement for trust in that system is immense. For a piece of paper to hold value, you need absolute confidence that the system enforcing that value won't collapse.
Which brings us to a period where the entire continent was forced into a single unified system of trust.
We are moving into the 13th century. The decentralized, chaotic web of the Silk Road is about to undergo a terrifying consolidation.
We enter the era of the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace.
It is the golden age of globalization, brought about by an era of unprecedented, iron-fisted unification under the Mongol Empire.
And it is the greatest paradox in the history of the world.
It really is. Genghis Khan and his successors unleashed the most brutal, devastating military conquests the Eurasian continent has ever seen.
They level entire cities, reroute rivers to flood capitals, and slaughter millions.
Yet the direct result of this apocalyptic violence is the greatest era of peace, free trade, and cultural exchange in history.
The sources contain a quote that perfectly summarizes the security of the era. It was said that a maiden bearing a nugget of gold on her head could wander safely throughout the realm.
How does a campaign of absolute terror translate into a golden age of secure commerce?
If we look past the initial violence of the conquests, we have to examine the cold, calculated administrative genius of the Mongols.
So it wasn't just mindless destruction.
Not at all. The Pax Mongolica wasn't born out of sudden benevolence or moral awakening. It was highly engineered economic policy.
Genghis Khan understood that his empire, which eventually stretched continuously from the Pacific Ocean to the edges of Eastern Europe, required an unfathomable amount of wealth to sustain its military and administrative apparatus.
And the Mongols knew that the most efficient way to generate that wealth wasn't just looting. It was taxing the continuous flow of long-distance trade.
So they essentially transitioned from being conquerors to operating a continent-wide protection racket.
Exactly. To maximize their tax revenue, they had to create an environment where merchants felt absolutely safe moving massive amounts of capital.
And they codified this in their legal system known as the yasa.
Right.
Let's talk about the mechanics of the yasa, because how do you enforce a single law across a continent that spans dozens of languages and cultures?
You enforce it through absolute predictable severity.
The yasa established uniform legal standards from Beijing to Baghdad. It brutally punished theft and animal rustling crimes that could collapse a merchant caravan.
The restitution laws were draconian, sometimes demanding the thief repay 9 times the value of the stolen goods or face execution.
They even established an empire-wide lost-and-found system for runaway slaves and livestock.
So the risk of banditry drops to near zero because the penalty is guaranteed annihilation by the Mongol military.
And crucially, the yasa guaranteed strict religious tolerance.
Yes. By decreeing that all religions were to be respected, the Mongols eliminated one of the primary sources of regional conflict that historically disrupted trade.
Furthermore, they offered massive tax breaks and elevated social status to merchants.
Which was a big shift. Under Chinese dynasties, merchants were often viewed with suspicion, placed at the bottom of the social hierarchy because they didn't produce anything, they just moved things.
But the Mongols inverted this.
They did. They gave merchants VIP status, provided them with capital loans, and treated them as vital organs of the empire.
But the legal code is only as good as the communication network enforcing it. And the Mongols built the greatest physical communication network of the pre-modern world.
The YAM system.
Yes, the YAM system.
It was a logistical masterpiece. It was a postal relay system, but to call it a postal service drastically understates its military and economic power.
The Mongols established heavily supplied relay stations every 25 to 30 miles across the entirety of the empire. Let's walk through exactly how a YAM station operated.
Okay, let's do it.
If I am an official Mongol messenger carrying an urgent military dispatch from the front lines in Persia back to the capital in Karakoram, what does that look like?
The messenger rides at maximum speed. As he approaches a YAM station, he rings bells attached to his horse or his belt so the station master hears him coming.
So they are ready for him.
The station master immediately saddles a fresh, fully rested horse. The messenger arrives, jumps off his exhausted horse, leaps onto the fresh one, and takes off again without losing more than a minute.
By repeating this process day and night, changing horses at every station, a message could travel over 200 miles in a single day.
It's the ancient equivalent of high-speed fiber optic cables.
It allowed information, military intelligence, and high-value goods to travel at speeds that were physically impossible anywhere else on Earth. And it wasn't just for military use, right? Authorized merchants could use it too.
Yes. If a merchant possessed a pesa, a specific tablet made of gold, silver, or wood given by the Mongol authorities, essentially acting as a VIP passport, they could demand food, lodging, and fresh horses at any YAM station.
The empire subsidized the logistics of its most important traders. And with this incredible infrastructure in place, human capital begins to move in ways it never has before.
The sources detail how the Mongols engaged in the massive forced resettlement of skilled laborers.
They didn't just conquer a city and leave. They extracted the human talent.
While the practice of forced relocation is brutal, historically, it acted as a massive accelerant for technological and cultural diffusion.
They would conquer a city in the Middle East, identify the master weavers, astronomers, and administrators, and forcefully march them thousands of miles east to work in the factories and courts of China.
Conversely, they took Chinese siege engineers and doctors and moved them to Persia to help administer the Western territories.
They violently forced isolated pools of knowledge to mix on a continental scale, which sets the stage for the era of the great travelers.
Because the roads are so safe and the infrastructure is so supportive, individuals can suddenly traverse the entire world.
Everyone knows the story of Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant who traveled the Silk Road to the court of Kublai Khan in the late 13th century. But the deep dive sources highlight a reverse journey that I think is vastly more interesting.
We have to talk about Rabban Barsama.
Rabban Barsama is the perfect embodiment of the Pax Mongolica. He was an Uyghur monk of the Nestorian Christian faith, and he was born in Beijing.
Just that opening fact is amazing. A Christian monk born in Beijing in the 1200s.
Right.
So in 1287, the Mongol rulers of Persia, the Ilkhanate, needed to send a diplomatic envoy to Europe to negotiate a potential military alliance against the Mamluks in Egypt.
And they chose Rabban Bar Salma.
So this monk from Beijing travels across the entirety of the Silk Road through the Middle East and arrives in Europe.
The logistics of that trip alone are staggering. And he doesn't just visit the edge of Europe. He goes deep.
He meets with the Pope in Rome.
He travels to Paris and meets King Philip V of France. He travels to Gascony and meets King Edward III of England.
He administers communion to the English king.
It is mind-bending to think about a Chinese-born monk casually discussing geopolitics with the King of England in the 13th century.
It demonstrates the absolute peak of connectivity. The world had shrunk.
And when travelers like Marco Polo made the return journey back to Europe, the information they carried was paradigm shifting. We talked earlier about the evolution of paper money in China.
Right. By the time Marco Polo arrives, the Mongol Yuan dynasty has perfected the use of fiat currency.
They are printing paper money not just as certificates of deposit backed by silver, but as currency whose value is dictated purely by the authority of the state.
Polo writes about this in his book, and he sounds like a man trying to explain a magic trick.
He describes how the Great Khan takes the bark of mulberry trees, stamps it with a seal, and forces everyone in the empire to accept it as payment under threat of death.
To European merchants who are rigidly dogmatically tied to the intrinsic value of gold and silver coinage, the idea of fiat currency is incomprehensible.
Polo introduces the psychological concept of state-backed paper wealth to the Western consciousness.
But the very mechanics that made the Mongol Empire a miracle of connectivity, the speed, the safety, the constant flow of people and goods along the Yam system, became the exact vector for its catastrophic unraveling.
We move from the peak of global prosperity straight into a biological apocalypse, the dark side of interconnectivity.
Because the Yam system doesn't discriminate.
A relay horse carrying a diplomat moves at the same speed as a relay horse carrying a pathogen. Biology doesn't care about the difference between a merchant and a microbe.
The outbreak of the Black Death in the 14th century is the ultimate unintended consequence of the Silk Road.
The sources outline how the plague caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis originated in the steppes of Central Asia, where it circulated harmlessly among populations of ground rodents, specifically marmots.
Let's get into the biological mechanics of how a disease jumps from a marmot burrow in Central Asia to destroying half of Europe, because it's a terrifying chain reaction.
It starts with the fleas.
When a flea ingests blood infected with Yersinia pestis, the bacteria multiply and form a solid plug that completely blocks the flea's digestive tract.
So the flea begins to starve.
Driven into a feeding frenzy by starvation, it bites anything it can find, regurgitating the infected blood into the new host with every bite.
And the Mongol infrastructure provided the perfect highway for these starving fleas. They hitched rides.
The sources explain that the fleas didn't just stay on the rats.
They embedded themselves in the bales of camel hair, the manes of the Yam relay horses, and the saddlebags of the merchants.
The Mongol Empire had bridged previously isolated ecological zones. A merchant caravan moving rapidly across the steppe would unknowingly pick up infected fleas.
Because of the incredible speed of the Yam system, a merchant could travel hundreds of miles before even showing symptoms.
The Silk Road was the artery, and the Mongols had accidentally injected a highly lethal, highly contagious pathogen straight into the bloodstream of Eurasia.
The plague travels west along the trade routes, moving relentlessly from station to station. It hits the trading city of Kaffa on the Black Sea in 1346.
And Kaffa is a crucial node because it's populated by Genoese merchants from Italy.
When the Mongols besieged the city, supposedly catapulting plague-infected corpses over the walls, the Genoese merchants panic.
They board their galleons and flee across the Mediterranean back to Europe, and they bring the infected fleas and rats with them in the holds of their ships.
The plague enters the ports of Sicily, Genoa, and Venice and explodes across the European continent.
The demographic devastation is almost impossible to comprehend.
In the span of a few years, the Black Death kills an estimated 25 to 50% of the entire population of Europe. It ravages the Middle East. It wipes out roughly a third of China's population.
It is exactly how modern global air travel functions during a pandemic. An outbreak in one city can be transmitted globally in a matter of weeks because the infrastructure is so efficient.
The Mongol yam system was humanity's first global super spreader event.
And the political and economic consequences were immediate and fatal to the network.
The sheer demographic collapse destroyed the tax base and the labor force of the Mongol Empire.
They simply did not have the manpower or the administrative capacity to maintain control over their massive remote territories. The unified network violently shattered.
Without the Mongol military enforcing the Yasa, the security evaporates. Local warlords rise up, the banditry returns, and the relay stations collapse.
The overland routes become incredibly dangerous and prohibitively expensive once again.
The Pax Mongolica dies, and the Silk Road goes dark.
The land routes become a nightmare, and the geopolitical situation in the West compounds the crisis.
What happens in the West?
In 1453, the Ottoman Empire captures Constantinople. By taking this city, the Ottomans effectively take total control of the western terminus of the Silk Road.
So they dominate the flow of goods from Asia into the Mediterranean.
And they can dictate the tariffs, charging whatever exorbitant prices they want.
This forces the European powers into an existential corner. Their economies, their diets, and their social structures have become completely dependent on the spices of India and the silks of China.
But the land route is now either physically impassable due to political collapse or economically impassable due to Ottoman taxation.
So they have to find another way. They look to the ocean.
This blockade is the direct catalyst for the European Age of Discovery. If you cannot go through the landmass, you must go around it.
This desperation drives explorers like Vasco da Gama to sail down the coast of Africa, round the Cape of Good Hope, and finally reach India directly by sea in 1498.
It completely changes the geopolitical center of gravity. For thousands of years, wealth and power were concentrated in the inland, landlocked empires of Central Asia, places like Samarkand and Bukhara.
Suddenly, the wealth shifts to the coastal maritime powers on the Atlantic edge of Europe: Portugal, Spain, Britain, and the Netherlands.
The maritime routes become the undisputed primary focus of global trade. The math of maritime trade was simply undeniable.
Despite the lethal dangers of scurvy, typhoons, and naval warfare, sea travel was infinitely cheaper per ton of cargo.
You could carry massive hauls of pepper and porcelain in the hold of a single galleon, and most importantly, a ship bypassed the endless chain of middlemen.
You didn't have to pay a tariff to a Sogdian, a Parthian, or an Ottoman customs agent. You loaded the boat in India and unloaded it in Lisbon.
So analyzing the timeline, did the Silk Road actually die when the ships took over, or did it just change mediums?
Did it just get wet?
It's an astute way to frame it. The fundamental human impulse, the desire to exchange goods, secure resources, and bridge geographies, didn't die.
The mechanism simply shifted to the new path of least resistance.
The physical desert paths, the caravanserais, the specific mountain passes decayed into history. But the golden road of the Indian Ocean, the massive maritime Silk Road, simply absorbed the volume.
The network evolved. And looking at the sources today, it is very clear that the network is evolving once again.
Oh, absolutely.
We cannot look at the history of the Silk Road without acknowledging its massive, multi-billion-dollar modern echo. China's Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI.
The BRI is a profound historical callback. It is a massive state-sponsored infrastructural project designed explicitly to recreate the continental connectivity of the ancient routes.
But instead of camels and yam stations, they are building high-speed railways, deep-water shipping ports, 5G networks, and massive energy pipelines across Asia, Africa, and pushing into Europe.
They're trying to physically reintegrate the Eurasian landmass to shift the economic center of gravity back from the oceans to the inland continent.
Exactly where it was during the height of the Silk Road. It proves that the underlying logic of the Silk Road, the geopolitical imperative to connect markets, secure supply chains against maritime blockades, and project power through physical infrastructure, is an enduring human instinct.
It wasn't just a quirky historical phase. It is a fundamental pattern of how empires behave.
We have spent an immense amount of time today tracing that pattern. We watched a Han Dynasty emperor desperately launch a war for blood-sweating horses, inadvertently carving a trade funnel through the desert.
We followed Sogdian merchants writing angry letters home while coordinating a 4,000-mile supply chain.
We saw Buddhist monks and Christian missionaries blending their theologies in fortified desert sanctuaries.
We examined the brutal mathematical efficiency of the Mongol law and their high-speed postal riders.
And we traced the devastating biological path of a starving flea as it hitched a ride on that exact infrastructure to change the demographics of the planet.
If there is one overarching realization to pull from this massive stack of research, It is that globalization is not our invention.
It is a messy, beautiful, and highly dangerous 2,000-year-old reality. Humanity has been fighting to connect, to trade, to understand, and to exploit each other across impossible distances for millennia.
Which leaves us with a critical, unresolved question for the present moment.
What's that?
Well, throughout this deep dive, we have seen that every massive leap in connectivity carries an equally massive, often hidden, vulnerability.
Like the plague on the yam system.
Exactly. The ancient Silk Road traded physical goods, and it was ultimately brought to its knees by a physical virus that perfectly exploited its most efficient networks. Today, our modern Silk Roads are digital.
We trade data, algorithms, financial derivatives, and cultural influence at the speed of light across networks that are infinitely faster than the yam system.
The question is, what kind of modern viruses, whether they are literal malware, coordinated disinformation, or algorithmic contagions, are currently hitching a ride on our networks of trust?
Have we built systems robust enough to survive our own hyperconnectivity? Or are we, much like the empires of the past, blindly engineering the highly efficient vectors of our own unraveling?
That is a staggering question to sit with.
If you trace the line from a biological flea on a camel to a line of malicious code on a server, the pattern is eerily identical. Thank you for joining us on this massive, intricate journey through the sources.
It's been a wild ride.
We hope you walk away with a much deeper mechanical and historical understanding of how a secret about a tiny, unassuming silkworm really did weave the foundations of the modern world. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep exploring the hidden connections of history, and we will see you next time.